cleaner sued for theft, but when they checked the security camera, Dorothy Miller trembled when she saw the court officers standing at the entrance of the mansion where she had worked for 15 years. Her boss, Richard Thompson, was pointing a finger in her direction with an expression she had never seen before. "It's her. It was Dorothy who stole the $50,000 from my safe," shouted the businessman, his voice echoing through the marble foyer. The 28-year-old woman felt her world collapse. The yellow cleaning gloves she always wore now seemed like evidence against her. The beige apron she wore with pride every day had turned into a mark of shame. "Mr. Richard, what are you saying?" Dorothy managed to stammer, her voice faltering. "I never—" "Enough with the lies," he interrupted sharply. "You're the only one with access to the office. The only one who knows the combination besides me and my wife." The officers approached, and Dorothy felt her legs wobble. 15 years of dedication, of always arriving promptly at 6 in the morning, of taking care of that house as if it were her own family. 15 years of caring for the businessman's children since they were babies, watching them grow up, being called Aunt Dorothy by them. "Confess now and return the money," Richard continued, his face red with anger. "If you don't do this, I will sue you criminally and destroy your reputation throughout Boston. No one will ever give you a job again." Dorothy began to cry. Tears streamed down her face as she wiped her hands on her apron, an automatic gesture she had done for so many years. The businessman she respected, whom she considered almost an older brother, now looked at her as if she were a dangerous stranger. "Please, Mr. Richard," she begged, "you've known me for so long. I raised your children, took care of your home. I never even took a candy from the pantry without asking. How can you think that I—" "The evidence is clear," he yelled. "The money disappeared last night and you were the last person to leave the office. My wife confirmed that you were there organizing the documents." Dorothy remembered the previous night. She had indeed stayed late, cleaning up a mess of papers she found scattered on the office floor. She thought it was strange at the time, because Richard was always very organized, but she thought maybe he had dropped something without noticing. "I was just tidying up the papers that were on the floor," she explained desperately. "I found everything scattered and thought it might have fallen from the window draft." "Liar!" Richard shouted. "You knocked over the papers while looking for the safe combination." One of the officers approached and handed a summons to Dorothy. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely hold the paper. The words danced before her eyes. "Criminal lawsuit, theft, $50,000. "Mom!" a young voice shouted from the entrance. It was Emily, her 16-year-old daughter, arriving from the private school where she studied on a full scholarship. The girl ran to her mother, her eyes filling with tears as she saw the scene. "What's happening?" Emily asked, protectively hugging Dorothy. "Your mother is a thief," Richard stated coldly, "and you need to know what kind of person raised you." Emily looked at the man in shock. She had grown up playing in that house, had known Richard since she was little. He had always been kind to her, asked about school, offered to help when she needed something. "That's not true," Emily said firmly. "My mother would never do that." "Innocent children always defend their parents," Richard replied with contempt. "But the reality is your mother stole from me, and now she's going to pay for it." Dorothy was formally notified and had to leave the mansion immediately. Her 15 years of service were reduced to a box with her personal belongings. The toothbrush she kept in the service bathroom, the special mug she used for coffee, the photo of Emily's graduation she kept in the kitchen drawer. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. In the following days, the news spread through the city like wildfire. Boston wasn't a big city, and everyone knew everyone. Dorothy had worked for several important families before settling in the Thompson household, and her reputation had always been impeccable. Emily arrived at school on Monday and immediately felt the stares. Whispers followed her through the halls. During recess, a group of classmates approached her with malicious smiles. "Emily, is it true your mother is a thief?" asked Brittany, a girl from a wealthy family who had always been jealous of Emily's intelligence. "My mother didn't steal anything," Emily replied, trying to keep her composure. "But everyone is talking about it," insisted another classmate. "They say she stole $50,000 from her own boss. How ungrateful." "Just imagine," Brittany continued with fake concern. Your mother worked 15 years in that house, knew all the family's secrets, and then decides to steal. Typical behavior of desperate people. Emily felt her blood boil, but she controlled herself. She knew any reaction would be used against her and her mother. With dignity, she walked away from the group and went to the library, where she always found peace among the books. Meanwhile, Dorothy was in line at the public defender's office. She had spent a sleepless night, trying to understand how her life had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. The money she had saved over years of work was barely enough to pay for a private lawyer, and Richard had hired the best firm in Boston. "Mrs. Dorothy Miller," called a tired voice. It was Dr. Anthony Reed, a public defender around 50 years old, with thick glasses and an enormous stack of files on his desk. Dorothy sat down in front of him, still wearing the same clothes from the day before. "I'm here because I'm being accused of a theft I didn't commit," she began, her voice still hoarse from crying. Dr. Anthony quickly flipped through the papers. He was an experienced man who had seen many similar cases throughout his career. $50,000 private safe, restricted access, he murmured as he read. "Mrs. Dorothy, I need to be frank with you. This type of case is very difficult to win, especially when the accuser has the resources to hire the best lawyers in the city." "But I'm innocent," Dorothy exclaimed. "I worked 15 years for that family. I raised their children. How can they think I would do such a thing?" "Justice doesn't work based on feelings," Dr. Anthony explained patiently. "It works based on evidence, and unfortunately, the preliminary evidence is not in your favor." Dorothy felt a pain in her chest. Reality was hitting her full force. It wasn't enough to be innocent. She needed to prove her innocence, and that seemed impossible. "What can I do?" she asked desperately. "First, we'll analyze the entire case calmly," the lawyer replied. "We'll see if there are inconsistencies in the accusation, if there are other people who could have had access to the safe, if there are security cameras." "Mr. Richard said the office cameras were broken," Dorothy informed him. Dr. Anthony noted that on his pad. "Interesting. When did they break? Why weren't they fixed? Those are important questions." Dorothy left the lawyer's office with a mixture of hope and despair. There was at least someone willing to listen to her, but Dr. Anthony's words echoed in her mind. "The evidence is not in your favor." Upon arriving home, she found Emily doing homework at the small kitchen table. Their house was simple, but always very clean and organized. Dorothy had taught her daughter the value of organization and hard work. "How was school, honey?" Dorothy asked, trying to sound normal. Emily looked up from her books. Dorothy noticed her daughter's eyes were red from crying. "There was bullying, wasn't there?" Dorothy sighed, sitting down next to her daughter. "They're saying horrible things about us," Emily confessed. "But I don't care about them, Mum. I know who you are. I know your character." Dorothy hugged her daughter tightly. Emily was all she had in the world. Her ex-husband had abandoned them when Emily was a baby, and since then Dorothy had worked twice as hard to give her daughter everything she could. "We'll get through this, honey," Dorothy said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The truth always comes out. But the next morning, the situation got worse. Dorothy received a call from the bank, informing her that her accounts had been frozen as a guarantee for the lawsuit. The little money she had in savings was now inaccessible. "What do you mean frozen?" she asked the teller. "It's a court order, ma'am. The amount frozen corresponds to the sum of the accusation as a guarantee of reimbursement." Dorothy hung up the phone, feeling completely lost. Without a job, without access to her own money, with a criminal case on her back. How was she going to survive? How was she going to keep Emily in school? That's when she remembered Mrs. Karen, Richard's wife. All these years, Karen had always treated her with respect and affection. Maybe she could help. Maybe she could convince her husband that he was making a terrible mistake. Dorothy fixed herself up as best she could and went to the mansion. The gate that had always been open for her now seemed like an insurmountable barrier. She rang the doorbell and waited. "Dorothy?" Karen appeared at the door, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Karen was 42, with well-kept blonde hair and always dressed elegantly. She was a polite woman from a traditional Boston family, but she had always been kind to the staff. "Mrs. Karen, I need to speak with you." Dorothy said in a trembling voice. "Please, give me 5 minutes." Karen looked around as if checking if anyone was watching, and then opened the gate. "Come in quickly," she whispered. "Richard can't know you're here." They went to the back garden, away from the house's windows. Karen seemed nervous, different from the always serene woman Dorothy knew. "Mrs. Karen, you've known me for 15 years, Dorothy began. "Do you really believe I could steal from your family?" Karen looked away, nervously fidgeting with her gold bracelet. "Dorothy, It's a very complicated situation," she said hesitantly. "I raised Michael and Sophie as if they were my own children," Dorothy continued, referring to the couple's children. "I stayed up nights when they were sick. I taught Sophie how to walk. I taught Michael how to brush his teeth. How could I have stolen from you?" "I know that, Dorothy," Karen said, her voice getting lower. "But Richard is very convinced. He said you're the only one who could have done it." "What about the cameras?" Dorothy asked. "Mr. Richard said they were broken." Karen got even more nervous. "Yes, they've been broken for a few months. Richard said he was going to call someone to fix them, but—" "A few months?" Dorothy interrupted. "But that means anyone could have entered the office without being seen." "Dorothy," Karen said abruptly, "I need you to understand something. Richard is going through a very difficult time at the company. He's stressed. Very stressed." There was something in Karen's voice that made Dorothy pay closer attention. "What kind of difficulty?" Karen looked around again and lowered her voice even further. "I shouldn't be saying this, but the company isn't doing well. Richard has been losing important contracts, and he's been going out a lot at night lately." "Going out where?" "I don't know," Karen admitted. "He says they're business meetings, but—" "Dorothy, I found strange receipts in his clothes. Receipts from places I don't understand." Dorothy felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was more to this story than met the eye. "Mrs. Karen, can you help me?" Dorothy asked. "Can you talk to Mr. Richard? Convince him that I'm innocent?" Karen sighed deeply. "Dorothy, I wish I could help. But Richard is very determined. He said that if I questioned his accusations, I would be betraying our family." It felt like a punch to the stomach. Even Karen, who had always been her ally, wasn't willing to take risks for her. "I understand," Dorothy said softly. "Thank you for hearing me out, Mrs. Karen." "Dorothy," Karen called out as she was heading toward the exit. "I'm truly sorry. You've always been like a sister to me." But words of regret didn't change reality. Dorothy left the mansion knowing she was alone in this fight. In the following days, Dorothy tried to get in touch with 2 other employees who had worked at the house before she left. She discovered something disturbing. Both had also been recently fired, also with accusations of petty theft. Carmen, who worked as the housekeeper, had been accused of stealing jewelry. Sally, who took care of the garden, was accused of taking expensive tools. Both denied the accusations but had no way to prove their innocence. Dorothy got Carmen's phone number and called her. The conversation was revealing. "Carmen, it's Dorothy from the Thompson house," she introduced herself. "Dorothy!" Carmen exclaimed. "I heard what happened to you. What a terrible situation." "Carmen, I need to know exactly what happened when you were fired." Carmen told her version. "It was very strange, Dorothy. One day, Mr. Richard called me and said an expensive bracelet of Mrs. Karen's had gone missing. He said only I had access to their room and accused me of the theft." "And you?" "I had never even seen that bracelet before," Carmen protested. "I worked there for 8 years, Dorothy. 8 years without a single problem, and suddenly I'm a thief?" "What did you do?" "What could I do?" Carmen sighed. "There was no way to prove I didn't steal something I didn't even know existed. I accepted the dismissal to avoid bigger problems. But Dorothy, after that, I couldn't get work anywhere. My reputation was tarnished." Dorothy felt a chill. The pattern was repeating. Long-time employees being accused of theft without concrete evidence. "Carmen, where are you working now?" "I moved to Chicago," Carmen revealed. "There was no way to stay in Boston. Everyone knew about the accusation." When Dorothy tried to contact Sally, she discovered she was admitted to a psychological treatment clinic. The pressure from the accusations and the inability to find work had led the woman to a deep depression. These discoveries gave Dorothy a new perspective on the case. She wasn't the first employee to be accused. There was a pattern, and this could be important for her defense. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now continuing. Dorothy immediately sought out Dr. Anthony to share this information. The lawyer listened with growing attention. "This is very important, Mrs. Dorothy," he said, taking notes. "A pattern of accusations could indicate there's something more behind these dismissals. What can we do with this information?" "We'll include this in our defense," Dr. Anthony explained. "We're going to show that Mr. Thompson has a history of accusing employees without solid evidence. This could raise doubts about the credibility of the accusations." Dorothy felt a spark of hope. Maybe she wasn't completely lost. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. Dorothy spent the days trying to prepare herself emotionally to face Richard again, this time in a courtroom. On the day of the hearing, Dorothy dressed in her best outfit, a simple navy blue dress that she wore for special occasions. Emily insisted on accompanying her, even though Dorothy tried to dissuade her. "Mom, I won't let you face this alone," Emily said with determination. In the courtroom, Dorothy saw Richard for the first time since the accusation. He was impeccably dressed, in an expensive suit, and accompanied by two elegant lawyers. Beside him, Karen avoided looking in Dorothy's direction. The judge, Dr. Frank Morrison, was a man of about 60 with graying hair and a serious demeanor. Dorothy felt her stomach churn when he began reading the charges. "Mr. Richard Thompson accuses Mrs. Dorothy Miller of grand larceny," the judge announced. $50,000 are alleged to have been taken from the accuser's private safe, with the accused being the only person besides the family with access to the location. Richard's lawyer stood up. He was a tall, confident man, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Dorothy made in 6 months. "Your Honor," he began in a pompous voice, "my client has trusted Mrs. Dorothy Miller for 15 years. Precisely because of that trust, she had unrestricted access to the house, including the office where the family safe is located. On the night of the incident, she was the last person in the office, claiming to be organizing documents." Dorothy shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The lawyer's words made her innocent tidying of the office sound like a suspicious act. "Furthermore," the lawyer continued, "Mr. Thompson has a witness who saw the accused near the safe at a suspicious time." This was a surprise for Dorothy. She looked at Dr. Anthony, who seemed equally surprised. "Who is this witness?" the judge asked. "Mr. John Smith, the property's gardener," the lawyer answered. Dorothy vaguely remembered John. He was a young man who had started working at the house a few months prior. She had barely spoken to him, just polite greetings when they crossed paths at work. John was called to testify. He was a young man of simple appearance who seemed nervous in the courtroom. "Mr. Smith," Richard's lawyer questioned him, "can you tell us what you saw on the night in question?" "Yes, sir," John replied in a low voice. "I was finishing watering the plants in the indoor garden when I saw Mrs. Dorothy in the office. It was around 9 in the evening." "And what exactly was she doing?" John hesitated for a moment. "She was fiddling with the safe." Dorothy stood up automatically. "That's not true," she exclaimed. "Silence," the judge ordered. "You will have your opportunity to speak." "Mr. Smith," the lawyer continued, "are you certain of what you saw?" "Yes, I am," John confirmed, but Dorothy noticed he avoided looking in her direction. When it was Dr. Anthony's turn to question John, he stood up with determination. "Mr. Smith, how long have you worked for Mr. Thompson?" 3 months, John answered. "And what time of day do you normally work?" "From 7 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. So why were you at the house at 9 in the evening?" John seemed uncomfortable with the question. "Mr. Richard asked me to water the indoor plants that day because there had been a party at the house the previous weekend." "And do you usually receive direct orders from Mr. Thompson? Or is another employee normally the one who coordinates your work?" "Usually it's Mrs. Karen or the groundskeeper," John admitted. "Interesting," Dr. Anthony observed. "Mr. John, are you related to Mr. Thompson?" The question took everyone by surprise. John became visibly nervous. "I don't understand the question," he stammered. It's a simple question, Mr. John. Are you related to the Thompson family? John looked at Richard, who was tense in his chair. We're distant cousins, John finally admitted. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Dr. Anthony had discovered something important. Distant cousins, Dr. Anthony repeated. And when did you get the job at Mr. Thompson's house? Right after I needed work, John answered, his confidence clearly shaken. Right after you needed work or right after Mr. Thompson needed a witness? Dr. Anthony pressed. Richard's lawyer immediately stood up. Objection, Your Honor. The defense is speculating. Sustained, the judge decided. Rephrase the question, Dr. Anthony. Mr. John, can you tell us exactly from what angle you saw Mrs. Dorothy tampering with the safe? John looked confused. What do you mean? Where is the inner garden positioned relative to the office? From where could you see inside the office? John remained silent for a long moment. Dorothy noticed he was trying to invent a convincing answer. From the back window, he finally said. But Mr. John, Dr. Anthony continued relentlessly, Mr. Thompson's office is on the second floor of the house. How could you see inside the office from the ground-level garden? John was clearly panicking now. I had gone up to water the plants in the second-floor windows. Ah, yes, Dr. Anthony said with irony. You watered plants in the ground-level garden, then went up to water plants on the second floor at 9 o'clock at night. And you casually looked through the office window and saw my client tampering with the safe. That's exactly what happened, John insisted, but his voice didn't sound convincing. Mr. John, do you know that lying in court is the crime of perjury, punishable by imprisonment? John turned pale. He looked at Richard again as if asking for help. I saw what I saw, he repeated, but now his voice was almost a whisper. Dr. Anthony let the tension hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Your Honor, I would like to call another witness to testify. It was Carmen, the former housekeeper. Dorothy had asked her to testify about the pattern of accusations. Carmen, a 45-year-old woman with a tired appearance, told her experience. Her sudden dismissal, the accusations without proof, the impossibility of finding new work. Mr. Thompson, the judge addressed Richard, can you explain why 3 different employees were accused of theft in recent months? Richard was visibly uncomfortable. Your Honor, they're isolated cases. Unfortunately, I discovered I had hired dishonest people. All with years of exemplary service? Dr. Anthony questioned. All accused without concrete physical evidence? The hearing was suspended so the judge could analyze all the information presented. Dorothy left the courtroom with a mixture of hope and apprehension. John's testimony had clearly been problematic, but there was still much to be clarified. That night, Emily was restless. Mom, I need to tell you something, she said. What is it, dear? Today at school, Karen Thompson, Mr. Richard's youngest daughter, came to me, Emily revealed. Dorothy was surprised. Sophie was only 10 years old and had always been very attached to Dorothy. What did she say? She was crying, Mom, Emily told. She said she doesn't understand why her father is being so mean to you, and that she overheard a strange conversation between her parents. What kind of conversation? Sophie said she heard her father yelling on the phone with someone about money, and that her mother was crying, saying he was destroying the family. Dorothy sat down, processing this information. Anything else? Yes, Emily continued. Sophie said she has a toy camera she got for her birthday. She plays at filming around the house, and this camera saves everything to the internet automatically. Dorothy felt her heart race. Films what? Everything, Mum. Sophie said she loves playing at filming her parents secretly, and that the camera records everything that happens in the office too. It was a remote possibility, but Dorothy clung to this hope like a drowning person clings to a branch. If Sophie had really filmed something. Emily, do you think Sophie would show us those recordings? I don't know, Mom, Emily said thoughtfully. She's little and must be confused with this whole situation, but she always liked you a lot. Dorothy stayed up all night, thinking about this possibility. It was risky to try to contact Sophie directly. Richard could accuse her of grooming a minor. But maybe there was an indirect way. The next morning, Dorothy was walking near Sophie's school when she saw the girl coming out of class. Sophie was a sweet little girl, with curly hair and big eyes, who had always treated Dorothy like a second mother. "Aunt Dorothy," Sophie shouted when she saw her, running to hug her. Dorothy knelt down to be at the girl's level. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you?" "I'm very sad, Aunt Dorothy," Sophie confessed. "Daddy said you did a bad thing, but I don't believe it." "Sophie, I want you to know that I never did anything bad to your family," Dorothy said gently. "You've always been like my own family." "I know that," Sophie said, her eyes filling with tears. "You always took care of me and Michael. You're not a bad person." "Sophie," Dorothy said carefully, "Emily told me you have a really cool toy camera." Sophie's eyes lit up. "I do. It's pink and films everything. I play at being a movie director." "And do you usually film at home?" "Always," Sophie said excitedly. "I film Mommy cooking, Daddy working, even the kittens in the garden. The camera saves everything to the cloud, just like Mommy's phone." Dorothy felt her heart race. "Sophie, did you by any chance film anything in your father's office recently?" Sophie looked thoughtful. "I think so. The other day I was playing at filming the whole house. I filmed every little corner." "Do you remember what day that was?" "It was last week," Sophie said. "On Thursday night. I couldn't sleep and stayed up late playing." Thursday night. It was exactly the night the money had supposedly disappeared. "Sophie," Dorothy said carefully, "do you think you could show me that footage? Maybe it filmed something important." Sophie seemed to hesitate. "Daddy said I can't talk to you anymore." "I understand, sweetheart," Dorothy said sadly. "I don't want you to disobey your father." "But," Sophie continued, "I can show Emily, can't I?" "Daddy didn't say I couldn't talk to her." Dorothy felt a wave of hope. "Of course you can, Sophie. Emily is your friend." "Then I'll show Emily the footage," Sophie decided. "And then Emily can tell you what she saw." It was a perfect solution. Sophie wouldn't be directly disobeying her father, but the evidence could still reach Dorothy. That afternoon, Emily met Sophie in a park near their schools. Sophie brought her pink camera and showed the recordings to Emily. What Emily saw in the footage completely changed the course of the case. The recordings showed Richard in the office on Thursday night, but they weren't the images anyone expected to see. Richard was visibly nervous, frantically fiddling with the safe. He would take the money, count the bills several times, and then make a phone call. "The money is here." Richard's voice was clear in the recording. "50,000, as we agreed, but this can't happen again." The voice on the other end of the line wasn't audible, but Richard's response was clear. "I understand you know about the problem, but I can't keep taking money from the company. My wife is already suspicious." More inaudible conversation, and then Richard said something that made Emily's blood run cold. "All right, I'll find a way to blame someone for the missing money. Maybe one of the employees." The recording continued, showing Richard hiding the money in a briefcase and leaving the office. Then, inexplicably, he returned and scattered papers on the floor, as if he were simulating a mess. Emily watched the recordings 3 times to be sure of what she was seeing. There was no doubt Richard had taken his own money and planned to blame an employee from the start. When Emily told Dorothy what she had seen, her mother was in total shock. "Are you absolutely sure of what you saw?" Dorothy asked. "I am, Mom," Emily confirmed. "It's all on video." Mr. Richard took his own money and even talked about blaming an employee. Dorothy felt a mix of relief and outrage. She finally had proof of her innocence, but discovering that Richard had planned to destroy her life from the beginning was devastating. "We need to take this to Mr. Anthony immediately," Dorothy said. "Mom," Emily said hesitantly, "there's one thing. Sophie made me promise not to tell anyone that she showed us the recordings. She's afraid of what her father will do if he finds out." It was a dilemma. They had the evidence that would prove Dorothy's innocence, but using that evidence could get Sophie in trouble with her father. "Let's talk to Mr. Anthony," Dorothy decided. "He'll know how to handle this in a way that Sophie isn't harmed." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. In Mr. Anthony's office, Dorothy and Emily explained the whole situation. The lawyer listened with growing interest and excitement. "This is exactly what we needed," he said. "But you're right to be concerned about protecting the girl." "What can we do?" Dorothy asked. "Legally, these recordings were made inside the girl's own home, so there's no issue of privacy invasion," Mr. Anthony explained. "And since she's a minor, she can't be held responsible for filming her parents." "But Richard might get furious with her," Emily observed. "That's why we'll present the evidence in a way that protects Sophie," the lawyer said. "We'll request that the judge review the recordings confidentially first and then decide how to proceed." The next day, Mr. Anthony filed an urgent petition with the court requesting an extraordinary hearing to present new crucial evidence for the case. The judge, Mr. Frank Morrison, summoned all parties to a closed hearing. When Richard arrived at the court with his lawyers, he had no idea what was coming. "Your Honor," Mr. Anthony began, "we have obtained evidence that definitively proves my client's innocence and reveals the true nature of this case." "What evidence is this?" the judge asked. "Video recordings that show exactly what happened on the night in question." Richard's lawyer immediately stood up. "Objection. How were these recordings obtained? There are serious privacy and legality issues here. The recordings were made inside Mr. Thompson's own residence by his own daughter, using a toy given to her by her parents," Mr. Anthony explained. "There is no violation of privacy nor illegal obtaining of evidence. The judge decided to review the recordings in his chambers before deciding how to proceed." Dorothy, Emily, Richard, Karen, and the lawyers waited outside while the judge watched Sophie's footage. When the judge returned, his expression was grave. "The evidence presented by the defense is extremely relevant and completely changes the nature of this case," he announced. "Mr. Thompson, would you like to change your version of the facts before I make a decision?" Richard was pale as a sheet. His lawyers were whispering urgently in his ears, but he seemed to be in shock. I can explain," Richard stammered. "You have the right to remain silent," the judge informed him. "But the recordings are very clear about what happened." Karen, who had watched the entire hearing in silence, finally spoke up. "Your Honor," she said with a trembling voice, "may I speak?" "You may, but you should be aware that your words may be used against your husband." Karen looked at Richard with a mixture of love and disappointment. "My husband is facing serious financial problems. He developed a gambling problem. The confession fell like a bomb in the courtroom." Richard tried to silence his wife, but Karen continued. "In recent months, Richard lost a lot of money in online casinos," she confessed. "He took money from the company, from our personal account, and finally from the home safe. When I started questioning the expenses, he became desperate." "Mrs. Thompson," the judge said gently, "are you aware of how your husband planned to resolve this situation?" Karen began to cry. "He said he had a plan to explain the missing money, but I never imagined he would blame Dorothy. She is like a sister to our family." Richard finally stood up, defeated. "All right," he said in a broken voice. "I took the money. I was desperate. I owed a lot of money to dangerous people, and they were threatening my family." The full confession followed. Richard had developed an addiction to online gambling during the pandemic. It started small, but quickly escalated to betting large sums. When he realized it, he had lost almost all the company's and family's money. "I was receiving threats," Richard explained. "They knew where my children went to school. They knew our routine. I needed that money to pay them off and buy time to reorganize myself." "And why blame Mrs. Dorothy?" the judge asked. Richard lowered his head in shame. "Because she was the only one who had access. I thought it would be easy to believe. And I thought that since she didn't have the means to defend herself properly, it would be easier to make the accusations stick." Dorothy felt a mixture of relief and anger. 15 years of dedication and trust had been thrown away because of Richard's addiction. "Mr. Thompson," the judge continued, "are you aware that false criminal accusations are a serious crime?" "I am, Your Honor," Richard replied softly. "And you, John Smith," the judge addressed the gardener, "are you also aware that false testimony is a crime?" John, who had remained quiet throughout the hearing, finally spoke. "Mr. Richard promised me $5,000 if I said I saw Dorothy tampering with the safe. I needed the money for my mother's surgery." It was the final confession that sealed Richard's fate. Not only had he stolen his own money and blamed an innocent person, but he had also corrupted a witness. The judge announced his decision. Based on the evidence presented, especially the video recordings, I declare Mrs. Dorothy Miller completely innocent of all charges. Furthermore, I order that Mr. Richard Thompson be investigated for false accusations, witness tampering and embezzlement. Dorothy Miller broke down in tears of relief. Emily hugged her tightly, and Dr. Anthony Reed smiled with satisfaction at the victory. But the story didn't end there. In the following days, the consequences of Richard's actions unfolded rapidly. Karen, devastated by the revelations about her husband's addiction and his willingness to destroy innocent people, filed for divorce. She also publicly revealed the truth about the accusations against Dorothy, clearing her name in the community. "Dorothy was like a sister to me for 15 years, Karen declared. She cared for my children with love and dedication. What my husband did to her is unforgivable." Michael and Sophie, Richard's children, were deeply shaken by the situation. Michael, already 17, sought out Dorothy to apologize personally. "Aunt Dorothy," he said with tears in his eyes, "I'm so sorry. I should have defended you from the beginning. I knew you would never do something like that." Dorothy hugged the boy she had helped raise. "Michael, you're not to blame for anything, for your father was going through very serious problems." "But I believed him instead of believing you," Michael insisted. "You taught me the difference between right and wrong, and I abandoned you when you needed me most." Sophie, still too young to fully understand the situation, only knew that she had helped her Aunt Dorothy with her toy camera. "I knew you weren't bad, Aunt Dorothy," she said innocently. "That's why I filmed everything." The Boston community was shocked by the revelations. Dorothy, who had been viewed with suspicion for weeks, was now seen as a victim of a terrible injustice. Several prominent families in town approached Dorothy to offer her work, but she had developed other plans during those difficult days. "Emily," Dorothy said to her daughter one evening, "I learned an important lesson from all this." "What lesson, Mom?" "I learned that I can't depend solely on the kindness of others for my financial security," Dorothy explained. "I want to start my own business." With the compensation she received from Richard, Dorothy opened a cleaning company specializing in high-end homes. But it wasn't just an ordinary company. Dorothy made sure to employ women who had been through situations similar to hers. Carmen, the former housekeeper, was the first employee hired. "Dorothy, are you sure about this?" Carmen asked when she received the offer. "I'm absolutely sure," Dorothy replied. "We know what it's like to be judged unfairly. Let's create a place where honest, hard-working women can rebuild their lives." The company grew quickly. Dorothy implemented strict protocols for transparency and protection for the employees. All the homes where they worked had security cameras running, and there were always 2 employees working together to avoid false accusations. Sally, who had left the psychological treatment clinic, also joined the team. "Dorothy, you gave me back my dignity," she said on her first day of work. The company became the most respected in Boston. The clients knew they were hiring not just a cleaning service, but women who had proven their integrity, even in the face of the greatest adversities. Richard, meanwhile, faced the consequences of his actions. In addition to the criminal proceedings, he lost his company, which went bankrupt after his financial problems were exposed. His gambling addiction had destroyed not only his family, but his entire professional life. He even sought out Dorothy months later, when he was undergoing treatment for his gambling addiction. "Dorothy," he said humbly, "I know I have no right to ask this, but I need your forgiveness to be able to forgive myself." Dorothy looked at him with serenity. The months had given her perspective and wisdom. "Richard, you destroyed my reputation, tried to destroy my life and my daughter's," she said calmly. "But you also gave me an opportunity to discover my own strength. Does that mean you forgive me?" "It means I choose not to carry anger in my heart," Dorothy replied. "Not for you, but for me. Anger would only hurt me more." 2 years later, Dorothy's company had expanded to other cities in the region. Emily, who had graduated with honors, received a full scholarship to study law, inspired by her mother's fight for justice. "Mom," Emily said on her high school graduation day, "I want to thank you for teaching me that the truth always finds a way." "And what else did you learn that I taught you?" Dorothy asked. that no matter how powerful the person trying to bring us down is, if we maintain our dignity and fight for the truth, there is always hope. Dorothy smiled, looking at the daughter who had become a strong and determined young woman. The tears of suffering from those terrible days had turned into tears of pride and accomplishment. Sophie, now 12 years old, still visited Dorothy regularly. She had become a girl aware of the power of her actions and the value of truth. "Aunt Dorothy," Sophie said during one of her visits, "I still have that pink camera." "And does it still record everything?" Dorothy asked with a smile. "Yes, it does," Sophie replied. "But now I only record beautiful things. I record when people are kind to each other." Dorothy hugged the girl who had saved her life with her innocence. "That's a very important lesson, Sophie. Always try to see what is good in people and situations." Karen, who had divorced Richard and rebuilt her life, also kept in touch with Dorothy. They had developed an even stronger friendship after all the turmoil. "Dorothy," Karen said one day, "I know our family caused you a lot of suffering, but I want you to know that you also taught us a lot about dignity and forgiveness." "We all learned something from this experience," Dorothy reflected. "We learned that appearances can be deceiving, that people can surprise for both good and evil, and that the truth, no matter how hidden, always finds a way to come out." Dorothy's company had become more than a business. It was a symbol that it is possible to rebuild life after injustice, that it is possible to turn pain into an opportunity to help others. Dr. Anthony, who had become a family friend, visited Dorothy occasionally for coffee and to talk about life. "Dorothy," he said during one of these visits, "your case changed my view of justice." "How so?" "Before, I saw justice only as a legal matter, of laws and procedures," he explained. "Your case showed me that justice is also about human dignity, about protecting the most vulnerable from the most powerful. And little Sophie showed me that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places," Dorothy added. "A child with a pink toy camera." They laughed together, remembering how a seemingly desperate situation had resolved in the most unlikely way possible. Dorothy had learned that life can change drastically overnight, but also that human resilience is greater than we imagine. She had discovered a strength within herself that she didn't know existed. "Emily," Dorothy said to her daughter on the eve of her departure for university, "what happened to us was terrible, but it was also a blessing in disguise." "How so, Mom?" "Because it showed me that I am capable of much more than I imagined," Dorothy explained. "If I had kept working as an employee, maybe I never would have discovered I could have my own business, employ other women, make a difference in so many people's lives. And it showed me what kind of person I want to be when I grow up," Emily added. "Someone who fights for the wronged, who doesn't accept the first version of the facts, who searches for the truth even when it's hidden." 3 years after the day she was falsely accused, Dorothy was in her office when she received an unexpected call. "Dorothy Miller?" said an unknown female voice. "Yes, that's me. My name is Patricia Wilson. I'm a journalist doing a story about social injustices. I would really like to tell your story." Dorothy hesitated. She had moved past those difficult days and built a new life. She didn't know if she wanted to relive it all again. "Why do you want to tell my story?" she asked. "Because your story shows that it's possible to overcome injustice and turn suffering into something positive," Patricia explained. "How many other women are going through similar situations right now? How many need to know that there is hope?" Dorothy thought about that. Maybe her experience could really help other people. "All right," she agreed. "I'll tell my story, but on one condition." "What is it?" "I want it to be clear that the most important thing wasn't the injustice I suffered, but what I built after it. The story, when it was published, had a huge impact." Dorothy received hundreds of messages from women who had been through similar situations, who found strength and inspiration in her story. One of the messages that touched her the most came from a woman named Anne. "Dorothy, I was ready to give up fighting the false accusations they're making against me. Your story showed me that the truth really always finds a way. Thank you for giving me hope." Dorothy realized her experience had become something bigger than herself. It had become a symbol of resistance for all people facing injustices. 5 years later, Dorothy was at a ceremony where she received a Social Entrepreneurship Award. Her company now employed more than 50 women in 5 different cities. "When I started this company," Dorothy said in her speech, "it wasn't just about house cleaning. It was about cleaning the stain of injustice that had been placed on our lives." The audience, composed mostly of working women, applauded enthusiastically. "I learned that we all have secret cameras inside us," Dorothy continued. "They're called conscience, a sense of justice, the ability to see the truth even when others try to hide it." After the ceremony, Dorothy was approached by Sophie, now a 15-year-old teenager. "Aunt Dorothy," Sophie said, "I still remember the day I showed that footage to Emily. And I remember how brave you were, even though you were so little." "That changed my life too," Sophie revealed. "It made me understand the power we have to make a difference in people's lives, even when we're small or when no one expects anything from us." "And what will you do with that lesson?" "I'm going to study journalism," Sophie announced. "I want to use my voice to expose injustices and help people like you." Dorothy smiled, seeing how her experience had planted seeds of justice in a new generation. Emily, now a law school graduate working as a public defender, was also present at the ceremony. "Mom," Emily said, "remember when you told me you had learned an important lesson from everything that happened?" "I remember. Today I learned a lesson too," Emily continued. "I learned that our pain can turn into other people's healing. Your experience not only saved our family, but it saved the lives of dozens of other women." Dorothy looked around, seeing all the women who worked in her company, each with their own stories of overcoming. Carmen, who now managed one of the branches, Sally, who had become one of the most respected employees, so many others who had found not just work, but dignity and purpose. "Do you know what the real victory is in all of this?" Dorothy asked Emily. "What?" "It wasn't proving my innocence or seeing Richard face the consequences of his actions," Dorothy explained. "The real victory was discovering that we are much stronger than we imagined, and that when we use our strength to help other people, we create a circle of healing that spreads far beyond ourselves." Richard, who had managed to overcome his addiction and partially rebuilt his life working a simple job, had also tried to get in touch with Dorothy over the years. He never again tried to justify his actions, only expressing his genuine remorse. In a chance encounter on the street 2 years prior, he had said, "Dorothy, I know I can never undo the harm I caused you, but I want you to know that your ability to forgive and move forward inspired me to become a better person." Dorothy had responded, "Richard, we all deserve a second chance to be better than we were. What matters is that you learned from your mistakes and are trying to fix your life." Now on the stage at that ceremony, Dorothy remembered how she had gotten there. From a cleaning lady falsely accused to a respected businesswoman and model of resilience. From a desperate woman without hope to a source of inspiration for hundreds of other women. "Sometimes," Dorothy said to conclude her speech, "the hidden cameras we need most aren't the ones that capture images, but the ones that capture the essence of people. The kindness, the dignity, the ability to endure and rebuild. These cameras are always recording, always showing who we truly are in the most difficult moments." The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Dorothy looked at Emily, now a brilliant lawyer, at Sophie, who had become a young woman determined to fight for justice, at all the women who had found a new chance in her company. Her story had begun with a false accusation and the threat of having her life destroyed. But it had transformed into a journey of discovery, of strength, of building something bigger than herself. Sophie's little pink camera had captured the truth on that crucial night. But the greater truth that emerged was that it's always possible to start over. It's always possible to turn injustice into justice. It's always possible to use our pain to heal the pain of others. Dorothy Miller was no longer just a cleaning lady who had been falsely accused. She was a businesswoman, a leader, a source of hope for all people facing moments of injustice and despair. And it had all started with a simple lesson she had always known, but had to rediscover the hard way. The truth always finds a way to come out, especially when we have enough courage to look for it and stand up for it. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of overcoming and justice. Do you believe Dorothy made the right decisions by turning her pain into an opportunity to help other women? Share your opinion in the comments with sincere words. Your perspective is very important to us. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories of overcoming and hope.